Hello again. And now we are continuing chapter 11 by discussing the aggregate demand. The aggregate demand is the one of the most fascinating part of this debate, and we are going to explain it and define it in a way that basically compiling all the knowledge we have obtained from the previous chapters. Actually, I found in the slides which I have posted, there was some mistakes. I just corrected it right here. It says chapter 23 and 24. It refers to chapter 8 and 9 and chapter 10. So I made during the presentation, when I was recording, I noticed and I fixed it here. So if you have the slides, you should be aware of that. So here the aggregate demand, it's if price change, what's going to happen to the aggregate output, which is equal to aggregate expenditure, which is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. If that happens, what is going to be? But for this process, we have money market, and we have goods market, goods and services market. So in this was discussed in chapter 8 and 9. This was discussed in chapter 10. And now we are in chapter 11, right? So we want to see that if price change, what's going to happen on the Y? In our model in chapter 8 and 9, we didn't have price. We had the aggregate expenditure here and the Y. In chapter 10 also, we didn't have price. We had interest rate here and the money here. Okay, so just briefly to draw the model we had, this is the equilibrium condition. Y is equal aggregate expenditure. This is the equilibrium condition. Okay, and the aggregate expenditure C plus blah 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 blah, and then equilibrium level of output. In money market though, we had money supply, which is decided by the Federal Reserve or central bank, and the aggregate demand, money demand, money supply, money demand, and then we would give the equilibrium level of interest rate. So these two markets are interconnected. If something happens here, it's going to affect this one, and if something happens here, it's going to affect this one. So they are interconnected containers. The metaphor I'm using, if you have a container, a container here, and you have certain level of water here, and if you have another container with different shape and you have water here, if they're connected with a pipe, okay, the water starts flow either way until the level of water is equal in both of them. So if this water is higher, actually the level will go up and this will come down until the both sides are going to be in equilibrium. So equilibrium in goods market, and this is happening through the price and interest rate. So if the price and interest rate is affecting the components of this CIGXM. Okay, particularly investment is a function of interest rate. We assume that it is given in chapter 8 and 9. Investment we assumed, and then we said that it is only autonomous investment. But if the interest rate change, so this is happening through two variables. And how the interest rate is endogenous here, but exogenous variable was price. If the price is increasing, then the aggregate demand is shifting to the right. If the price is dropping, the deflation happens. This is shifting to the left, so interest rate will change. So now we have a choice to draw three variables at the same time. So we have price, then we have interest, and then we have y. So there is nexus between them. Nexus, I like this word, nexus. Nexus means interrelationship. Okay. So we have limitations in drawing. We have a limitation in drawing. We can draw y against p or y against I. So aggregate output against the interest rate, aggregate. Actually, this is what we ultimately call it, aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. But the book brilliantly is bringing another model which the demand side and the supply side are explained. It's called ISLM model. Okay, so I'm going to explain. If goods market is in equilibrium, we have IS. If money market is in equilibrium, we have LM. In recent books, instead of this IS is that equilibrium condition, leakages and injections. Investment was an injection and saving was. So we had the simple model I equal S. Once in the government added investment plus government spending, they are the injections, and the saving plus the tax are the leakages. And if we have the more advanced one with export import, export is an injection, it comes in this side, and S plus T plus import is here. So the equilibrium in goods market is represented by IS curve, and it's if the I change, how the equilibrium change, this is the IS. Everywhere in the IS curve is showing that equilibrium in goods market is fulfilled, and the intersection of the money demand and money supply always is showing the liquidity money LM curve. And then there is going to be a level of output and the level of interest, which bring both the markets of goods and into equilibrium. And in the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, we do it differently. So what if we are taking this one and with associated price, this is called the aggregate demand. And the aggregate supply also, we discussed it earlier. It's going to be like this. So we are after drawing the aggregate demand and explaining why it is downward sloping. So because of the limitations of the drawing, we have a choice either to draw the ISLM curve, and then from ISLM curve we can draw the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. So that was in the bracket and a very brief explanation that how do we derive the aggregate. So the aggregate demand is derived from all the interrelationship between interest rate, price, and output, which we learned from the chapter 8, 9, and 10. And plan aggregate expenditure, actually we should also add x minus m, which the simple model is being presented in the chapter 8 and 9. So that has been taken out. What will happen if the interest rate change? I would put it this way. That I would say that, let's say that price level is increasing. So what is going to happen in the money market? So this is called shorthand writing with the arrow up and arrow down, and I like it. So in money market, so we have money market, money supply, money demand. Here is money, here is the interest, and here we have the 45-degree line and the aggregate expenditure. Always remember that make mark in the axis. So if this happens, let me write it below. It would be better to write it like this. So the argument is that, okay, inflation takes place. We knew that money demand is a function of interest, price, and output. And if interest is negative and price and output is positive, so because this is increased, so the money demand is shifting to the right. Money demand prime. So if we initially had interest rate 0, what's going to be the new equilibrium? New equilibrium is going to be I1. So as a result of this, we would say that money demand in the goods in money market, this is money market, and this is goods market. Money demand is shifting to the right and above, and as a result, interest rate will increase. Okay, interest rate will increase. And once the interest rate is increasing, what is going to happen? Here, C plus I plus G plus X plus net export. Which one is going to be affected? This had a negative relationship because it was I0 minus CI. So if the interest rate will go up, the I is going to shift down. So if this was, if it was 2%, now it's increasing to 3%. Actually, investment is going to go down. Investment is going to go down. And as a result, the entire aggregate expenditure prime. So the output, if it was Y0, it's going to be coming to Y1. So we would say that as a result of this, investment is going to go down, and this is one component of the entire aggregate expenditure. So aggregate expenditure will shift down, and what is going to happen? The Y is going to go down. So we have three variables which are in Nexus: price, interest, and output. So we have two ways of drawing. Either we can show the relationship between interest and output in one diagram, and we would call it IS. Why IS? Because it's showing the equilibrium condition is fulfilled. Y equal aggregate expenditure, or I equal saving, or I plus G is equal S plus T. So this is what is called, always we take the IS. I plus G plus X is equal S plus T plus M. So always again you take the IS. So investment saving, if you draw this against this, in case that you want to show the relationship between, so it shows the combination of I and Y, which the economy is in equilibrium. It's intersection of the 45-degree line and the aggregate expenditure. Okay, so if we draw that, it's called IS curve. So we can draw it. We can have Y and interest rate, and this is going to be downward sloping. Why? Because initially the interest rate was I0, Y0, and now it increased to I1, it reduced to Y1. So there is an inverse relationship between the two. So this we call it IS curve. We can, quite contrary, we can draw the price and Y. So the relationship between, so this is already, I is also in equilibrium. So money market is in equilibrium. So this money market, goods market. If the price is changing, and this happened through a change of the price. And now if we are drawing that, we initially were in P0, and now we increase to P1. What happened? We came to Y1, and initially we were in Y0. If we interconnect them, the curve which you get is called aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is showing that both money market and goods market are in equilibrium, whereas the IS curve is showing that goods market is in equilibrium. Combination of the I and Y, which goods market is in equilibrium. AD is a combination of P and Y, where both money and goods market are in equilibrium. So that interconnected containers, once the sets level of equilibrium is been matching between both markets, this is which price and which output level. So let's say that the height is being measured by the Y variable, and the price, if the price change, something change here and then goes there and go back and forth until it settles in both markets. Okay, so this is showing that goods market is combinational. So you see that the price goes up, Y goes down. Interest goes up, Y goes down. So there is inverse relationship between these two, and there's inverse relationship between these two. But if you take the P and Y, you are considering equilibrium in both of them. But if you take only I, you are discussing it. This is at I0. This I prime is at I1. If interest rate change, what is happening to the output level to keep the goods market in equilibrium? So I already actually covered the entire thing. So I will go a little bit faster now. So the relationship between interest rate and the aggregate output can be discussed. See, initially it was 3%, now it's 6%. So this is shifting down, and then the output is going down. That is called, it shows that part of my argument that if the interest rate goes up, investment will go down and the aggregate expenditure go down. And you see the inverse relationship between interest rate and the Y. Here interest rate is shown with the rate R. I like to show it with I. That's more suitable. And that is showing the I-S-curve relationship between aggregate output and the interest rate in the goods and services market. So with interest rate fixed and increase in government spending, what will happen if there is a shift takes place? There are other exogenous variables like government spending or tax. If they change, then aggregate I-S-curve may shift to the right or left. In goods market, I-S-curve, if only interest rate change, we are moving alongside the I-S-curve to the down or to the, but we will have equilibrium level of output. But if additional variable change, so we assume the government spending is not going to change. If the government spending is changing, then entire aggregate expenditure is shifting to the right. Or if the tax is increasing, it may actually shift, it may shift to the left. If tax is increasing, for example. Things like that. In goods market, what would be happening if the goods market, this is showing the goods market, what will happen if the money market to be in equilibrium? Money market is in equilibrium if the Federal Reserve is not responding to the change and allow the interest rate and the Y to be matched. This is used to be called liquidity money curve, LM curve. If interest rate goes up, okay, I bring the money market here. Sorry, it's a little bit messed up. Money supply and money demand. Okay, if inflation comes, okay, then aggregate demand will shift to the higher level, right? Aggregate demand, money demand is shifting up, and then interest rate will increase, and given certain level of Y, So this is if y at certain level of y. But we know that if this happens, then in goods market, it's going to change the y and then the y. So we would say that interest rate causing a change in investment and causing a change in y, and changes in y causing a change in money demand, and then is changing the interest rate. So that this is the interconnectedness, that interest rate might be changed, equilibrium interest rate might be changed because of an initial shock of the price, money demand change and interest rate change, and through the this cannot no longer be fixed, because it's going to, the water flows to the goods market and the level of output is changing. And remember that if the level of output is changing, then the money demand was a function of interest, price, and output. So now that the output is changed, again, this is going to be shifting until both markets are in equilibrium. But if we assume that the independent from the goods market, if only y change, let's say y is increased, I rewrite it, and interest rate is going to change. So if the y goes up, then the money demand will shift to the up, and then the interest rate will go up. And if the y is go down, money demand will go down and the interest rate will go down. This interrelationship is what is called, see, there's a positive relationship. This interrelationship is called liquidity money demand. But in recent textbooks, they justify this positive relationship between y and I as the Federal Reserve monetary rule. Or monetary policy rules, monetary policy rule curve. And that is showing the interest rate and the output, the positive relationship between them. The positive relationship is called monetary policy rule. In older textbooks, they were calling liquidity money curve, LM curve. They are basically carrying the same concept. Okay, so that the textbook has been saying the behavior of the Fed. If the output and inflation are two main inputs into the Fed's, so Fed is deciding about the interest rate as the output and the price are changed. So they say that the decisions about the targeted interest rate is a function of the output, price, and every other important variables like Z. Okay, and if there is a positive relationship between the interest rate and the inflation and interest rate and the output, so alpha and beta are positive figures. So this is basically showing the federal rule or monetary policy rule, and this is showing the IS. IS is representing all the equilibrium, the combination of I and Y, which goods markets are in equilibrium, and a combination of R and Y, which money market is in equilibrium, is represented by the Fed rule or the LM curve. And therefore there is going to be only one pairs of R interest rate and the aggregate output which brings the both economy into the equilibrium. And how the shift is in IS would be caused by changes in the exogenous variables like fiscal policy, because the fiscal policy is happening in goods market, changes in the G or T, etc. And if the P shifts, then the Fed rule is changing. So if the price level change, then the Fed rule is shifting to the right or left. And if the other factors change, again, the Fed rule is changing. So the other factors, depending on what are they, that is... So driving the aggregate demand, I already told you that the aggregate demand is not a market demand and is not the sum of all market demand curve in the economy, because many prices rise together. When the overall price level, we cannot use the ceteris paribus assumptions to draw the aggregate demand. It's already, there is a nexus. It is impossible to keep everything else the constant. So we will allow that adjustment, the nexus adjustment between endogenous variables are taking place, and then we will see the what is called the aggregate demand. So aggregate demand falls when the price increases, because P leads to the Fed and then the rise of this. So this analysis is written here is exactly what I explained in here. So make sure that you understand this flow of argument. If the price change, something happens in the money market and the interest rate will change, and through the interest change the aggregate expenditure shifts because investment change, and then the output. So the price and interest rate and they are equilibrium variable, endogenous variables. So how they are interacting with one another, there's that assumptions of ceteris paribus is in the short run or long run is working this way, and as a result we will have the aggregate demand curve. It's a downward sloping. So the higher the interest rate causes aggregate output to fall, and the aggregate demand curve is derived from figure the IS curve. Each point on aggregate demand is an equilibrium point in figure 11.6 for a given value of the price. When the price is increasing, then we would have the Fed raises the interest rate, and then it will affect the plan aggregate expenditure, and it's causing a change in the Y, and aggregate demand reflects this negative relationship in between the price and output. So I think maybe it's not entirely well elaborated, the IS curve, but I tried into the whiteboard, on the whiteboard, to explain the limitations. We have three variables which are simultaneously influencing one another. So because the Cartesian system have only two axes, you can decide to show it with interest rate and the Y, that's ISLM model, or price level and aggregate output, which is called the aggregate demand. So now we would go to the equilibrium. We would go to the equilibrium and then we will wrap it up. So in the next video, we will talk about the overall equilibrium. Thank you.